Hello everyone, back tuning in to the GWV Sunday Round-Up. We're going to have an eclectic look at different things for today's Sunday Round-Up, looking at solar activity, the QBO, what's happening with the oceans, and we'll also look at weather next week to 10 days as well, so quite a bit to cram in. I'll get on with that for you in a second. This afternoon we'll have a little bit of a rain watch, because we've got quite a bit of rain coming up over the next 48 hours, starting tomorrow and going through into Tuesday. That'll be coming up with you this afternoon. Starting off with solar activity then, for the Sunday Roundup. So this is the solar disc on our side of this today from solarhound.net. Not a huge amount going on, but we have got one quite active area of sunspots just there. Solar activity is, though, at low levels today. This is the GWV Solar Activity Tracker, been updated by a good friend James Ackwood. It's been a couple of weeks since we had a look at this, because we didn't do the Sunday Roundup last week. Of course, it was the summer forecast that we issued last Sunday. So, in terms of solar activity, well, at the beginning of April, we had that big ramp up in sunspot numbers, went up to quite a high level, actually, for where we are in the solar cycle anyway. And that lifted the trend lines, which are indicated by the thick green and thick red lines. That lifted the trend lines upwards. The last couple of weeks, though, we've sort of been flatlining with those trend lines, really. Very quickly from that ramp up in activity, we dropped back down again, because we are at a period of the solar cycle where we're seeing declining sunspot numbers. Of course, we're moving into solar minimum, so we can't sustain that high level of sunspots that we had just there at the beginning of April. And that's roughly where we still are now. If we come over to this side of the tracker, that orange spot is the very latest. So we have still got a small number of sunspots on the solar disk, but not really much going on. And overall, the trend lines, as I say, they are kind of flatlining at the moment at a low level. Over the next year to 18 months, these trend lines will drop further as we move down into solar minimum inevitably, which will be occurring in around 18 months. When you get to solar minimum, the reason we look at this, when you get to solar minimum, you increase the risk of colder winters via northern blocking, because there's a connection between solar activity and blocking and the strength of the jet stream, probably due to the energy that the sun is throwing into the atmosphere. So when you have high levels of sunspot numbers, you are increasing the jet stream, kind of, and that is a signal for us for milder Atlantic-driven weather. Conversely, when the jet stream weakens, you can set up northern blocking, and northern blocking is a route to getting cold out of the Arctic and down into the mid-latitudes. So around solar minimum and 2 or 3 years afterwards, we increase the risk. No more than that. It's not a guarantee of anything. It's never guarantees when it comes to the weather. But after solar minimum and around solar minimum, you increase the chance of colder winters for the UK and Europe. Obviously, we'll keep you updated with the GWV's solar activity tracker, and many thanks to James for keeping that updated for us. Looking at the oceans next, we had quite interesting developments in the Pacific Ocean over the past week or so. Now, if you've been keeping an eye on the ENSO updates, we do one of those every month. If you've been keeping an eye on those ENSO updates, you'll know that 2 or 3 months ago, it looked as though we was moving towards El Nino. However, during the spring, we have kind of stalled the El Nino, and actually, we might now be going the other way slightly. So, the ENSO region is from Peru, which is just there, to Indonesia over here, and, of course, all the expanse of the Equatorial Pacific Ocean in between. When you get El Nino, you tend to see orange and red colours appearing on these maps, because it's a warming of the Pacific Ocean in the equatorial region. However, we've got no sign of that. And actually, over towards Peru, we are seeing a few blue splodges turning up. They're slightly colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies beginning to appear in the eastern part of the equatorial Pacific. That is not what you'd be expecting to see at all if you was going into an El Nino. Now, maybe over the next 2 or 3 months, we might start to see the ocean warming through the equatorial Pacific. It is still early days on this, but right now the El Nino is in trouble. If we're going to have one, I think we're going to have to see the sea surface temperature anomalies warming quite quickly, and I'm quite dubious really about whether we are ever going to get this El Nino going. It could be that we're just going to stick around ENSO neutral through the next few months, albeit on the warmer side. Further north in the Pacific Ocean, we've got quite cold sea surface temperature anomalies up there. That's probably the reason why this El Nino is struggling. I think the PDO is moving towards a colder type setup. In the Atlantic, we've got quite an interesting sea surface temperature anomaly profile as well. In the central Atlantic, got all of this cold water just here. It looks really quite cold off the coast of Newfoundland, but down in the tropics it's actually very warm. Now this area just here off the coast of Africa in the tropical Atlantic, that's the breeding ground in the summer and autumn for tropical storms and hurricanes. They develop in this sort of area and then get carried over towards the Caribbean, and sometimes, of course, going into southern parts of America. Also, they can curve out and up the eastern seaboard, get caught up in the jet stream, and get brought into the UK and Europe as areas of low pressure. Now, if we keep these warm sea surface temperature anomalies going through the tropical Atlantic, it may well be that we're going to have quite a strong hurricane season this year. One of the things that would negate that is if we go into El Nino, because you don't normally get a strong hurricane season if you've got an El Nino event going on. But of course El Nino is stalling, so it may well be, if these warm sea surface temperature anomalies continue here in the tropical Atlantic off the African coast, it may well be that we're going to have more storms and hurricanes coming up over the next few months. That typically starts around July and then continues through the end of the summer and into the autumn. We'll, of course, keep you updated on that. Having a look at Siberian and Scandinavian snow cover next. This is how things were looking the last time we did the GWV Sunday Roundup on the 14th of May. You see, we had quite a lot of snow across Scandinavia and much of central northern Russia at that point. If you have a look at the latest, this is the latest from yesterday, Saturday 3rd of June. You see that the snow is very quickly going now across Scandinavia and northern parts of Russia. We do still have some across northern Scandinavia. We do still have some snow cover across northern Russia, but this is going to all disappear within the next couple of weeks, I would have thought. By the time we get through to the end of June, just about all parts of Eurasia should be without snow, except, of course, over the mountainous regions. I think this is still a little bit above average, however, for the time of year in terms of the snow cover through northern parts of Russia. Having a look at Arctic sea ice, of course, the melt season is underway now. We'll be bottoming out in September. Earlier on in the melt season, back earlier in the spring, which is indicated by this blue line for this year, by the way, we was at a very low level of Arctic sea ice. Now it looks like we're converging with 2012. That's our death spiral year, of course, indicated by this green dash line. That went down to that level. It was a very severe thaw-out of the snow cover across the Arctic that occurred in 2012. We're still a little bit under 2012 at the moment, but I suspect what's going to happen is that this blue line will very shortly converge with the green dash line with 2012, and then probably go above 2012 as we get further into the melt season. We are well under the 10-year trend, by the way. That's indicated by this grey line just here. Moving on to the QBO next, it looks like we're beginning to move towards an easterly QBO. It's time to develop the easterly QBO. So this chart is showing the QBO going right the way back to the 1940s, right way back to 1948. The easterly QBO is indicated by these minus numbers. The westerly QBO is indicated by positive numbers on this chart. I haven't shown this very often. So we should have gone into an easterly QBO around this time last year. So if you go back to 2015, you can see, and that's this year just here, you can see that we did have a lot of negative numbers there at the start of 2015, minus 28, for example, in February and March. That's proper easterly QBO. Through the second half of 2015, we went into a westerly QBO. This is a cycle that occurs roughly over around 15 or so months from westerly to easterly, and it kind of tells you the strength of the zonal westerlies, really. When you're in the westerly QBO, the zonal westerlies are strengthened. So a westerly QBO, at its crudest, is a strengthening of westerly winds, and it's a signal for mild weather, particularly in the winter. The easterly QBO is a reversal, if you like, of those zonal westerlies, and it can be, not always a guarantee, I say it's never a guarantee with weather, but an easterly QBO can be a signal for colder winter conditions. So we had the easterly QBO through the first half of 2015, then we went westerly through the second half of 2015, lasting into 2016. We should have got our next easterly QBO going through the middle part of last year, middle part of 2016, and we did start to go into an easterly QBO. So, for example, you can see +9, +6, +3 through the first 3 months of last year, reducing from a westerly into an easterly QBO. Around this period just here, you would have expected minus numbers to start appearing. They didn't. What actually happened is that the westerly QBO came back through the second half of last year, which is something that has never happened as far as we know, certainly back to 1950, probably much further back than that. The easterly QBO failed, and this should be almost like a pulse or a heartbeat that is regular and doesn't do what happened last year. You should not get a failure of either an easterly or a westerly QBO. We don't know why that happened. We are beginning to move back towards an easterly QBO now, though, however. So for 2017, we have these positive numbers at the start of the year, +14, +14, +14. So that's the westerly QBO continuing. Been a really long westerly QBO, of course, but the past couple of months has seen a reduction in the numbers. So we have +13 there, and our latest number is +8. So we are beginning to reduce the westerly QBO. It's beginning to weaken and ease. And if we carry on as we should with this, each month from this +8 just here, each month should go lower and lower until we get to around here, when, if everything is working as it should be within the atmospheric setup, we should start to see minus numbers appearing, and that will be our next easterly QBO beginning. So as we get through to the winter, which will be this period just here, and then on into 2018 here, of course, we get through to winter, we should be having an easterly QBO if everything works as it's supposed to in terms of the atmospheric setup. Of course, what happened last year, we don't think that's ever happened before, so we can't say with absolute certainty that we won't see another failure of the easterly QBO. But if everything's working right, we should be into an easterly QBO by the time we get through to the winter, which might be a bit of a signal for something colder for the coming winter. We should wait and see on that. Arctic oscillation next. This is an index that's reflective of the state of the atmosphere in the North Pole. It doesn't drive anything, it just tells you what the atmosphere is doing, and it's the same with all the indexes that we look at. Really, the QBO is the same. That's not driving anything, it just tells you what the atmosphere is doing. So the Arctic oscillation has been in a negative phase for quite a while, actually. We go through, we can go back to February and March with black line just here. That tells us where we've been with the Arctic oscillation. We was positive then, but in April we trended down into negative territory with the Arctic oscillation, and we've stayed negative really ever since. We did go a little bit positive there earlier in May, but then we went back to negative again, and with the forecast part of this, which is indicated by the red lines here, the GFS ensembles, are forecasting the Arctic oscillation to stay negative as we go through into the middle part of June, just here. So that tells us we've got high pressure up over the polar region, and that's the reason we're probably going into quite an unsettled pattern through the first half of June. The Arctic Oscillation and its cousin, the North Atlantic Oscillation, they tend to move in blocks of 2 or 3 months. So we're having a couple of months, at least, of generally negativity of the Arctic Oscillations. Will probably run out of steam and go positive in July or August, which will be better news if you want warmer, drier conditions for the summer. But for the time being, it looks like we're keeping the Arctic Oscillation negative. Same with the North Atlantic Oscillation. Again, black line here tells us where we've been with the NAO. Red lines where GFS ensembles are forecasting the NAO to go. So again, around April, that's when we turn from the positive NAO that we had through the first part of the year and back into the end of last year. We turned from positive to negative through April. We've stayed negative through May, and the red lines at the end here, GFS ensembles are forecasting the NAO to stay negative as we go through into the middle part of June. So we've got both the indexes, the AO and the NAO, in negative territory. That's not really what you want to be seeing in summer, because that tends to coincide with quite wet conditions and southerly tracking areas of low pressure and all of that kind of thing. So it's not a tremendously good signal, really, that, if you want warmer, drier weather in the summer. Have a look at GFS ensembles next couple of weeks. Coming to the weather for the next week, 10 days, of course. So the red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average. Round average at the moment. Going to go a little bit cooler than average later in the week. And then to get through to the end of the week, into the weekend, when it looks like we're warming things up a bit. Going a bit above average. So around the end of the week into the weekend, it might turn a little bit warmer then. Probably not lasting all that long. Going back close to average once more as we get through into the second week of June. For precipitation, we've got quite a bit of rainfall coming up over the next few days. So we've got all this wet weather I've been talking about at the start of the video through Monday and Tuesday. That's indicated by those rainfall spikes there. And then more coming up later on in the week. After that, running up towards the middle part of the month, it looks like we're keeping it showery. Nothing desperately wet then, but certainly still the risk of some showers coming through. Temperature anomalies for the next week are looking slightly below average, actually, so not deviating too far, really, but I think overall we are slightly on the cooler than average side from the 4th through to the 12th of June. Precipitation anomalies, now this is quite a change on what we had back in the spring, when we had a lot of dry weather. Precipitation anomalies for the next week are coming out really quite significantly wetter than average, particularly through this central swathe of the country. As I say, we will have a look at the rain situation we've got coming up over the next couple of days later on this afternoon. So that's the pretty horrendous chart the GFS is showing us for Tuesday. A 990 millibar area of low pressure sitting over top of the country. Looks really unsettled to start the coming week. Lots of wet and windy weather coming through with that. That low pressure clears away on Wednesday, leaving us in a really cool and quite strong run of northwesterly winds. Very poor conditions through the middle part of the week. Thursday brings another area of low pressure in off the Atlantic, although with heights rising across France, we are starting to drag slightly warmer air up from the south. So that's that increase in temperature that you saw on the GFS ensemble chart. Could well be quite a bit of rain in the north and west, particularly on Thursday. That's the general election day. Of course, it does look like it could be an unsettled day this year. We get through into Friday, and again, it's still looking unsettled. Probably more showery than persistent rain on Friday, and then into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Well, this looks quite autumnal, doesn't it? We've got 975 millibar area of low pressure to the west of Scotland. Strong winds are coming in with that, tightly packed isobars. So again, another really quite strong blow, especially for the north and west, and probably more rain bands coming in across the country as well. So next weekend, not looking all that good, to say the least. Beyond that, we're running up to day 10. And a slight improvement for England and Wales because we start to ridge up this area of high pressure from the south. So as we run up towards the middle part of the month, we begin to perhaps show signs that we are reducing the jet stream a bit and pushing it northwards, which means for England and Wales it might turn drier and warmer as we run up towards the middle of June. However, still looks unsettled there for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Finally, the ECWF, there's that deep area of low pressure exiting into the North Sea on Wednesday, giving us a swipe of really quite strong and cool northerly winds. Through into Thursday, again, low pressure's coming in off the Atlantic, so that's bringing more rain in as people are wanting to vote. Not very good news on that either. Friday still looking unsettled with low pressure close to the country, and then over the weekend we start to drag up some warmer air from the south temporarily into the southeast, but it's still low pressure that's dominating things. You notice that the ECWF is not as deep with this area of low pressure as the GFS, so they are differing on the intensity of this low. It doesn't look quite as autumnal, but it's still unsettled. There'll still be rain and fairly strong winds next weekend to the north and west. Beyond that, again, signs of improvements for England and Wales as this ridge begins to extend up from the Azores high. So that's looking better. It's not really good, but it is better, it's drier, it's warmer for England and Wales, but it does still look a bit unsettled up to day 10 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the signals might be there today, but as we get through to middle of part of June, we might start to see something a bit drier and warmer beginning to push up from the south. But before that, next week or the coming week does look really very unsettled indeed. And of course, I'll have more about the rain that's expected tomorrow and into Tuesday later on this afternoon. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.